February 26, 2024. What's up, my mammals? I'm Dana Durnford, also known as the nuclearproctologist.org. A few other names we're not allowed to say on YouTube. You can call in at 709-589-4406. I'm trying to psych myself up here. I apologize. Mighty firing on a couple of cylinders here tonight. Still good enough to kick the shit out of the nuclear industry, though. We got a poll we're going to get to in a moment. This is, they got 4 melted reactors, 8 fuel pools melted down in Fukushima. And the media has covered it up successfully in the universities. Reactor 1 has lost its fuel pools and reactor cores, and there could be around 8 to 10 reactor cores in the fuel pools. There's 2 of them at the top of the building. They estimate it's around 3,450 assemblies. Each assembly is around 1,800 pounds. So reactor 2 is 100% meltdown and the loss of around 8 reactor cores in the fuel pools. Reactor 3, she was a doozy, eh? Isn't that a big one? Look at that explosion. And what you see falling back down to the earth really quick is the fuel pools in the reactor cores. And the stump to your right. So the building is completely gone. In 2013, this is what reactor 3 and 4 looked like. Reactor 4 to your right. And there's nothing left. They only kept them there so they can put these contraptions they built off-site over them and then pretend that they're actually in the fuel pools. And so why would you do something like that? My, oh my, oh my. Why so dark? But the official story is nothing got out, they said, and it's in 2014, or 2023 last year, July the 13th. This is the author is a professor at the Department of Nuclear and Quantum Engineering. And he says it's like throwing 3 grams of sugar into the ocean. So why did he pick up 30 million one-ton bags of radiation? Why was the food banned by 55 countries and 14 prefectures? Right? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I got all kinds of radioactive fallout dispersal models based on TEPCO's numbers. This is the plutonium. A 239 named after the devil, by the way, because it's so incredibly harmful and dangerous. Typically, you get 3 tumors: liver, lung, and the bone. The bone normally kills around 80% of you, the tumors. And it also mutates the stem cells of all the children, all the insects and birds and mammals and animals and everything else. That brings us up to tonight. Here's tonight's show. Tonight's show. Bear with me, I get my smokeroos together. So last night's show was 2 hours, 8 minutes, 21 seconds. 38 views. So why is everybody attacking me when I literally get no views? At 38 views, and that was 10 minutes later, and I had 46 likes. How's that work, I wonder? It's 127 viewers, by the way. And the poll last night was, should the United States of America have a congressional hearing into the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's ruthless cover-up of Fukushima nuclear meltdown? That's a very intriguing video. We've covered quite a bit of this over the last week, too. These are Freedom of Information files that were released. Alrighty. And now we get to the poll, the big poll for tonight. Hey, where you to, baby? Oh, yeah. So, let me go backwards for a second. Just make sure we cover all of our bases. The show last night was 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 21 seconds. So my video got 4 seconds longer after 12 hours. That's the current number right there. Just the middle one at the top of the page. All right. So now we got polls about farming. And so the question tonight in the poll is, with the radioactive fallout flowing from 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, because the fuel pools are still splitting atoms, right? So you take the reactor core out and you boil, each reactor core boils water for about 1 million homes. There's around 8 reactor cores in the fuel pools. Each fuel pool is still splitting the same amount of atoms as it would when it was boiling water. And that's the problem with nuclear waste, is it's splitting atoms. Those atoms are vented into the environment at a capacity that's hard for the average person to comprehend. It's catastrophic to the species. So the poll tonight, with radioactive fallout flowing from over 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, is nuclear a lethal threat to Earth? And that's 100% is. I'm going to give you some evidence to back up these types of assertions. So the big question is, why is almost every single nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? And because, the reason I say that is because they know that foliage and roots uptake the cesiums, the strontiums, the zirconians, say in tomato plants. There's all kinds of studies saying that building a nuclear power plant in the middle of farmland is a very bad idea indeed. And because the people in the supermarket have no idea their food is unbelievably contaminated from the constant emissions from fuel pools, it's a very urgent question. And you should really take it to heart how urgent this question is, because nobody's ever had this conversation in history that I know about. Child's risk of cancer from radiation is 10 to 100 times higher than an adult with the same exposure. It's actually 1,000 times difference, because the children are developing, right? And so they're producing significant amount of stem cells in their bones, but they're also producing a significant amount of hormones, because they have to regulate and everything has to grow and develop, right? So they're 1,000 times more vulnerable than an adult who's not, doesn't have those particular attributes like a child would. So when you see a nuclear power plant on almost every single picture from an aerial view and it's surrounded by farms, that should terrify you, because they know that the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment from splitting atoms. And so the fuel pool is boiling off. About each fuel pool is over 1,000 worldwide, not counting the laboratories, the national laboratories, and the universities and experimental reactors and stuff like that. So how low doses of radiation cause heart diseases and strokes? So it's not just cancers, there's all kinds of illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses. Liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, list very long. And so why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? And now, post-Fukushima, we've covered the entire planet in radioactive fallout. So gas, oil, and coal emissions don't make plumes that covers the whole planet and pulses energy almost at the speed of light for millions of years. And remember, the gamma is going to pulse around 600 feet. Cesium-137 could be a couple of football fields away from your house and pulse right through your house. So that's not to mention alphas and betas and neutrons and x-rays. We're only talking about gamma. So this is nasty stuff. This shouldn't exist on your planet. They're exterminating you. They got 80-year jump on you now. So it's okay to fight back. It's appropriate to fight back. And because the species can't fight back, then you should do it. Radiation and health specialists, children with over 11 becquerels a kilogram, which is, think of 11 atoms, and they pulse energy every second. And the pulse of energy is almost at the speed of light. And that could go right through your body and wreck chromosomes and DNA and cells. And it does, of course, if you're in that vicinity. And all the species. So a becquerel is the decay per second. So the atom pulses energy. That's considered the becquerel. But it's almost at the speed of light. So very harmful, very dangerous, in very small amounts for very long periods of time. long beyond the human experience, basically. So you got 1,000 fuel pools at nuclear plants alone, right? Each reactor has 2 fuel pools dedicated to them. And then each site also has a common spent fuel pool. So if you got 412 reactor sites or reactors worldwide, you're looking at over 800. And then you factor in a couple of hundred spent fuel pools, you're at 1,000, right? But it's much more than 1,000. And so these weapons manufacturers that are also reprocessing used fuel are surrounded by farms. This is Sellafield, United Kingdom, formerly known as Windscale, and they had a plutonium mixed oxide fuel meltdown, which was reclaimed uranium plutonium from bombs and nuclear bombs. And that process of separating and reclaiming the hot particles, the fission products, you release, because you're boiling in nitrous acid at around 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. But they've been accused in academic studies that we've covered many times of contaminating the Arctic and Europe. And this one, by the way, has 8 million liters a day hemorrhaging into the Atlantic Ocean since 1957 from a mixed oxide, the worst of the worst reactors, which just at that time was considered a breeder reactor, where they would produce uranium or plutonium for bombs from a single reactor, could produce unlimited bombs because you were breeding plutonium. So the definition of stupid is a breeder reactor. And you can't contain the emissions. Columbia medical professor inhaling just one hot particle. So, for instance, Vancouver, British Columbia had 20 million particles of iodine-131. So a particle typically is considered a hot because it's part of the fuel element. Right, so you consumed steel or rebar or cement or wiring or something at enormous temperatures, and you atomized an aerosol and ionized and radiated the particles. So and wherever that lands, that's going to radiate stuff too. So Canada had 20 million particles per liter of rainfall of just the cesium or iodine-131. And for every iodine-131, there was 10 times more iodine-132, 30 times more iodine-133, 31 times more iodine-129. And the 132, 133 are 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating the thyroid gland than the incredibly effective 131 was. And then the iodine-129 got a 15 million year half-life. And those studies, we got separate studies to back up those assertions that you would produce 31 times more for every iodine-131. In a study from Ottawa, Canada, of 220 million atoms of iodine-129 per liter of rainfall sustained. In other words, you had a plume covering the planet of iodine-129 at numbers we've never heard of before. There is no dirty bombs can match this. Each of the reactors are worse than all nuclear meltdowns combined, not counting the fuel pools at the top of the buildings. So why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? The only obvious is they're poisoning you on purpose. This simply can't be a coincidence. The influence of the development of the temperate fruit tree species and the potential for their uptake of radionuclides. So they're very familiar that having a farms, and you can see like a child swing, and then farm, and then a nuclear plant in the background. I believe that was 3 Mile Island picture, that one. Is outrageous that the engineers are designing nuclear power plants to be in farmland is unbelievable betrayal. That's a hideous, monstrous, odious, just unforgivable, horrifying, shameful, just it's an unpardonable, it's a frightening, terrifying, fearsome thing to do is to grow food around disease factors like nuclear power plants because they're hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools, for instance. And when they change the fuel, they have to open up the containment so then it hemorrhages radiation again. Like even more. It never stops hemorrhaging radiation in 24 hours. You know, about 120,000 liters out of each pool, and each liter is going to be saturated, completely saturated with curium, plutonium, uranium, americium, neptunium, the death of a planet. And it happens in increments over decades, but there's no way to avoid it. And because as the plants get older, you're putting more fuel in the pool, so they're splitting more atoms. See? It's a monstrosity. It's frightening. It's super villain stuff. 50 becquerels a kilogram, which is 50 atoms a kilogram in humans, adults, lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. So you can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't even see it. But 50 of them, which is impossible obviously to see, in your diet will ultimately lead to permanent lesions to your organs, which means now your immune system is compromised. Now you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses and diseases and illnesses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign. And so particularly the elderly and children become much more vulnerable. And it blows my mind that the world has never had this conversation. Nobody's ever asked that question before. As far as I know, we're the only people to ever ask that question. Why are all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? And because they, like, you know, at 100 becquerels a kilogram before it was nuclear waste, after it's considered, and they're only acknowledged in cesium, for goodness sakes, which pulses, by the way, around 600 feet. Energy every second. 100 becquerels a kilogram of cesium is safe to eat, but 50 becquerels a kilogram is irreversible lesions to your vital organ and is permanent damage to the hearts of small animals and mammals and children. It's an evil industry. There's no... And they knew it. They know exactly what they're doing. And they're covering it up like they did with Reactor 4, for instance. And the media and the universities... The only way that they can do this is the medias and universities have to participate in the lie. And that's disappointing that we can't trust our... And like when I say you can't trust your universities, it's not based on bigotry or bias or prejudice. It's based on factual documentation. That's unassailable, it's incontestable documentation. Cesium-134, 85 strontium in fruit plants. 85 strontium is a nasty isotope, by the way. In fruit plants following wet aerial disposition. So why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms when the evidence suggests this is the worst possible case scenario? Why would you do that if you're not trying to exterminate the human species with prejudice? Because sickness from radiation is a terrible way to die. It's a very long, drawn-out process where the majority of parents whose children are affected will liquidate their assets in order to give their child an extra day of comfort, for instance, right? There's, top cancer doctor, nuclear radiation, most carcinogenic thing that exists. So why are almost all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? Because the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation, they're splitting atoms. With radioactive fallout flowing from 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, is nuclear lethal threat to Earth? And because the numbers we're talking about, let's go back to the big screen actually. I'll find my way around here in a second. Maybe. Just bear with me. Let me get one of the models up that help articulate the horror of what we're talking about. Okay, so let's now use think this is the Neptunium 238 model coming up. 239, which decays to plutonium 239. So that model over there is based on 20 days after the tsunami, 14 days after the last reactor blew up. And so the numbers that TEPCO used is equal to the numbers that are coming from the fuel pool of a single nuclear reactor. In other words, a single nuclear reactor will produce radioactive plumes that will cover the entire planet. But it produces one of these plumes every day for 60, 70, 80 years. Each fuel pool is producing bigger plumes than what we're looking at. And because it gets sucked up into plants and pollen and trees and insects and humans and every time you have a forest fire, you liberate a massive amount of radiation back into the environment because you can't destroy it. And so this should have never ever got to this stage. And then Fukushima was a pulse event where the inventories of 40 years for 4 reactors were lost. And by building your fuel pools at the top of the buildings, you were guaranteed an event like that was eventually going to happen at one of those sites. And not coming up with a scenario to store the fuel somewhere else, you sealed that deal, didn't you? And then Japan built its reactors in a earthquake zone right alongside tectonic plates, 30, 40 miles away from tectonic plates, where you know you're going to have serious events, where you have 1,000-year legacies of thousands of earthquakes a year and a 3,000-year legacy of tsunamis. So building your nuclear power plants in that environment, how could you not have an event, a major event like Fukushima? And Fukushima, each of the reactors are worse than all the nuclear meltdowns in the world combined, just the reactor core, because it's pure uranium, pure plutonium. Smiling Mascot asks his Fukushima kids to gargle to stay safe from radiation. This is not even voodoo stuff. This is quackery. Like radioactive sparkles and happy children. Like you can't protect yourself by gargling. All you can do is watch the radiation deeper into your body where it sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. So when I started to look up nuclear power plants, I was trying to get a collection, right? And then I started noticing something that I didn't want to believe. I just didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe it until I found this picture right there. And then I started realizing, okay, I got to start again and look up nuclear power plants with aerial views, right? And look for farms in the background. And I said, you'd probably find 30% or 40%. It'd be terrible. That's going to be terrible, right? That's going to be a great story. And how was I supposed to know almost every single nuclear power plant was going to be surrounded by farms? And right alongside of important drinking water, too. And that the damage from this stuff is catastrophic. And so they're only talking about, you'll see, if you hang around here, you'll notice they'll basically all they really talk about the majority of the time, cesium-137, which is a gamma, a very long pulse of energy, very damaging high energy too. But it's disrespectful to suggest that cesium is the worst isotope, because curium is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods. So you didn't close down, the world didn't ban the food from 14 prefectures. Think of a prefecture like a state in America or a province in Canada. So when you banned 14 prefectures by 55 countries, it's time to open your eyes up. It's time for you to pay attention. This is not a game. Because a bowl of this stuff can destroy your health and your children's health, and you're never going to know what happened to you until a couple of years later. You're wondering why. You know, one of the first things with nuclear poison, brain damage, is weight gain. And Japan's obesity rates almost doubled in the first year. And this wasn't lost on the academics, but it was lost on the media because they're not going to report on that. And that's just one of the many adverse side effects, but it's definitely a sign of radiation brain damage. It's obesity after a nuclear event. So if you've got a bunch of friends, you know people in your family or yourselves who gain weight just right out of the blue, you got poisoned. And TEPCO's grown food. Canada was the only country who was importing food from the nuclear wasteland. And they started doing it after 93 days, lifted all restrictions, while 55 countries had restrictions on 14 prefectures. Canada lifted restrictions on all the prefectures, the whole country. And so they shipped all this poisoned food to Canada, and Canada is in a health crisis right now because of it. This is a never waste a crisis mode, and they are poisoning you and everyone and everything on this planet with prejudice. So when you got all these studies that show that food's just going to suck up the radiation, now you don't need the studies, right? Because this is idiot math. Anybody can figure this is what's going to happen. Because if you surround a nuclear disease factory with farms, then you're going to poison that population that eats this stuff. And when these are active farms that are getting huge subsidies from the nuclear industry itself so that they can shift the radiation from the local area, 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. So why are they growing food around nuclear power plants? Why do they hate us so much? Because 80 years of this is the evidence they hate you. You can pretend it's not, but it absolutely is. CC-137 immediately damages the heart muscles, causes heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, and later it causes Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. And some of the first studies they're going to do after a nuclear accident is Down syndrome and autism, because they know they're going to find it in a polluted population. And then they're going to do sex ratio studies looking for more males being born than females, which is also a sign of entire population getting poisoned. And these are the kind of studies they done after Chernobyl in Europe, all of Europe, and found these horrifying discrepancies in sex ratio studies. They also do them around just any reactor because they know they're going to see these discrepancies. Modeling of CC-137 vertical soil transfer by a tree root system. So then if it does it to a tree, it's going to do it to plants, it's going to do it to fruit trees and everything else, right? And vegetables. And I was terrified when I seen all these nuclear power plants surrounded by farms. It was like this, oh my God, they're slaughtering us on purpose. Where we're the most vulnerable in our supermarkets, where we're supposed to be protected. Don't be fooled by the paid industry consultants, nuclear radiologists. Low doses of ionizing radiation causes cancer. It causes heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. Literally, the entire medical textbook ends up manifesting from radiation poisoning. And diabetes, of course, you can almost trace the history of diabetes all the way back. The explosion, right? The epidemic of cancer and diabetes and Alzheimer's can be traced back to nuclear testing. It all started to show up in the 70s after a couple of decades of massive atmospheric testing. And even the underground testing was all vented in up above it because, like, there's a good example where they had a nuclear weapon buried deep down. It was a small one, but it was buried deep down in like a shaft. And at the top of the shaft, they had like a manhole cover. And that manhole cover is traveling in deep space right now. It left our orbit at about 170,000 miles per hour from the nuclear underground testing. Because the nuclear underground testing will split the Earth open and everything will vent out at very high speeds. This industry, the reason they done it out in the Marshall Islands is because they were polluting their whole country, see? And now they knew in the Marshall Islands, for instance, like when they did on Castle Bravo, which was equal to 1,000 Nagasaki 15 kiloton bombs going off at one time, They knew that this was lethal doses in fallout, and I showed a clip last night of it, where they estimated it was 5,000 square miles. If you were in that unprotected, that was a lethal dose to a human for 5,000 square miles. But currently in the Marshall Islands, a study in 2019, I don't know if I can find it, because it's been a while since we dragged it out. Let's see how the old noggin plays out here for us. Oh, this is just pure luck, right? This wasn't planned. Pure luck that I found the study. This is 2019 study. You can see July the 30th, 2019. Oh, the radiation fallout contamination in the Marshall Islands extended over 1 million square kilometers and severely impacted the habitability of the affected atolls. That's 2019. We still had 1 million square kilometers too radioactive to live in the Bikini Atolls. Nuclear is a curse. It's a curse for millions of years on humanity on top of it. Experimentally determined translocations of cesium-134 in potatoes. So they know radiation. So why would you grow potatoes alongside nuclear reactors? Why would you grow, feed, have animals in the meadows when you know it sucks up all the radiation? Why are nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? And that's a question that we can't ignore anymore. 16,000 homeless have quit Fukushima. These are not workers. These are not nuclear plants, nuclear scientists, nuclear academics or anything. It's the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language, right? Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? Right? I mean, that's the poll, the most important poll I think we'll ever have on this site is this poll tonight. With radioactive fallout flowing, and like flowing doesn't really do it justice. Like the amount we're talking about is stunning. It's stunning. Let's do the math. Let's do some math. Calculator. So let's say there's 1,100 fuel pools worldwide. Multiply that by 120,000 liters every day. Is 132 million liters a day worldwide hemorrhaging, and each liter is just unbelievable amount of trillions and trillions per liter of atoms, anthropogenic man-made atoms. So let's multiply that by 365 days. And that's 48 billion liters a year worldwide. 48 billion. So the numbers we're talking about, you can't actually do an equation. Well, we'll try for you. So let's multiply that by 50 years. Now let's multiply that by a quadrillion isotopes per liter. So 1.1258 and a whole bunch of zeros. Let's do that. Right there, is it? That's millions, billions, trillions, quadrillions. And that's your basic number. It's an absurd number, right? Released into the environment, which is more atoms than stars in the solar system, right? And so this is saturating, plumes at 100 million, million atoms per square meter of the xenon-133. Like this is a frightening picture. Nuclear power plants surrounded by farms, and the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation all day, every day. Invisible plumes covering the entire planet. It's not just the farms. Rain with 20 million particles. And think of a particle as a hot particle, and that a single hot particle can invoke an illness or a disease or an autoimmune deficiency or an injury or an illness. per liter fell on the United States and Canada post-Fukushima. Why are all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? Why was that so important? So this number here is enough to wipe out all the insects in a continent, for instance. Because you're talking about per liter, and it never goes away. And it doesn't pulse energy very far, but it's enough to sterilize the insects, for instance. It's enough to wreck the chromosomes, the DNA, and there's enough of it there to saturate the thyroid glands of every species on the continent. Because you're talking about per liter. So you saturate, just that on its own will saturate the thyroid glands of every species. And they're going to be producing radioactive hormones. I don't see how there's anything more important than this. I can't quite comprehend how anything could be more important. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? Thyroid cancer risks lasts your entire life. So iodine got an 8-day half-life, but the harm lasts your entire life. Radiation, small doses actually could be disproportionately worse. The doses spread out over time might be more dangerous than doses given at once. So eating radioactive food over and over again is your worst nightmare for your loved ones and yourself and your friends and your families. And think about the disconnect. The Wall Street Journal reported that officials sharply raised radiation levels for the victims to get iodine pills after the meltdowns in Japan. And they disrespected, we're calling it a meltdown. 75 times higher than the degenerate World Health Organization recommended for children. So imagine, it's impossible to appreciate the cruelty of these people, the monstrosity. To raise the radiation levels 75 times higher for children before they can get any kind of relief. So it's like a child can't get painkillers anymore unless they're missing both legs and both arms. That's the equivalent to what we're talking about. And the reason every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms is because that's how they can poison you without ever meeting you, without targeting you specifically. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram, 50 atoms per kilogram of cesium. And so when you only acknowledge cesium, then that makes you a monster, by the way. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? And a Monticello nuclear power plant, I think it's Monticello, was it, on the Mississippi River? Surrounded by farms as far as you can see, folks. And Japan is so cruel, they're growing food for harvest right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. Like, how do you get that disconnected, really? How does that actually work? And nobody's ever told you this. Nobody's ever asked you that question before. Nobody's ever showed you this documentation before. And that's the terrifying fact, is you'll never find this anywhere but at my site. I think, to me, that is just a terrifying reality, that the world has no idea this is happening. I can guarantee you the world will not tolerate this if they were to wake up to it. Okay, so that didn't take very long. We got pretty good. The preamble only took us 37 minutes tonight before we start the show. And not that I like to be thorough, it's just that I got no choice. Alrighty, here we go. Let's get after it. The fourth Fukushima treated radioactive water release to start on February 28th, this Wednesday, in 2 days' time. 2 days' time. Fourth Fukushima treated radioactive water release. The very fourth release. It has only released water 4 times. That's amazing. That's an incredible lie, too. Let's go back to 2013. Let's look at Reactor 4. Does anybody really believe nothing got out of that building? Is there anybody out there? Huh? Is there anybody out there that gullible that really believes that nothing got out of the building? By the way, this is France's model of 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. and that this model is only based on 9 days of radioactive fallout since the last reactor detonated on the 16th. So this goes all the way up to the 25th or 26th. And the models is their study, this is backed up by studies, is showing 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air of just cesium-137. So how can it only be the fourth release on this Wednesday when everything was gone on day 6? So if it was only the fourth release, then why did the NRC put this out in March, from March the 12th to the 31st, that the iodine-131 is approximately 5 to the power 10 to the power 17 in curies, which is 13.5 million curies. So how can we have that happen, which by the way is only about 3.5 ounces, when in reality you gotta so you got, say, 6 million pounds in each building, because the fuel pools, there's 2 fuel pools at the top of each building. They're stuffed with decades of reactor cores because there's no repository. But when you have a meltdown, you're going to cannibalize the steel and the rebar and the cement and water and everything else, and you're going to atomize it and aerosol it. You're going to ionize it and you're going to radiate it. And so now instead of having 6 million pounds, you got another 1 million pounds of the building. But that 1 million pounds of the building, when that's ionized and radiated and atomized and aerosoled, I don't know how to come up with that number. The number is so vast. And this is why we see a lot of studies showing huge amounts of particles of fission products that were irradiated in it. Into the ocean on Wednesday was what to be the last discharge for the fiscal year ending March. March 11th is the anniversary. This model, as you can see up there, is only 2013 of the emissions into the ocean from a German institute. The move comes after the latest batch of water has been confirmed to meet radioactivity levels within the standards set by the central government, Tokyo Electric Power Company, which is just they're not a decommission authority. They have no right to even be on that site. The wastewater, and they're calling water you're pouring over a multi-reactor core wastewater, is not just dishonest, it's criminal. And you can't have a future using narratives like that whatsoever. So here's 19.5 days, 468 hours. And you see Fukushima radioactive fallout is global warming. Well, it's 80 years of emissions of these plumes covering the entire planet. Think about this for 1 second. So you got 80 years of these plumes covering your planet every day, new plumes showing up from the fuel pools, 1,000 fuel pools. And these plumes cover your planet, they're pulsing energy almost at the speed of light, and these snowflakes that are radiation could pulse 600 feet of energy at the speed of light. And that's going to wipe out the bacteria and the fungus, by the way, which is the foundation of your ecosystem. So gas, oil, and coal emissions don't cover the planet in plumes, and they don't cover the planet in plumes that pulse energy at the speed of light every second. Just shy of the speed of light. TEPCO and the central government maintain disposing of the treated water is crucial towards decommissioning the nuclear plant. Well, if that was true, they can dig a deep geological repository and store it down there for 1 million years, right? They don't have to dump it into the ocean. The tanks are empty. The tanks were built so you wouldn't look for stuff like that. When they tell you that nothing got out of the reactor, they don't show you that picture of the building to your left, do they? They're not going to show you that picture and say, well, nothing got out, because what are you going to say? You're going to call them a liar, right? That lie only works when you don't show the building. So if you think that the tanks are full of lethal radiation, then you bought into that lie. And it's not your fault. You found me, and you'll get you up to speed. My apologies. At least I didn't burp. Yet. Into the ocean on Wednesday was to be the last discharge for, well, again, the ocean. We already went through that, didn't we? Suffered a reactor fuel. So they changed that framing of it used to be nuclear meltdown. Then it was a nuclear reactor melt. And now it's a reactor fuel meltdown. This is another, so here's the media. This is just a fraction of major medias. The one to the bottom right is Cecilia Vega, ABC, which is biggest media in Australia. BBC Rupert Winfield Hayes is the biggest in the United Kingdom. CBS Seth Dorn is the biggest in United States media. Pretending they're in a building that don't exist. Now, they can't get away with that without universities and all the media worldwide backing them up. So the whole system is corrupt. And so now they show you these pictures instead of the reactors. They show you this bizarre picture. I'm just looking. So I like to show, I put these pictures together a long time ago, way back in the day. So if I show you these pictures, say on TEPCO, and I show you these pictures and I'm saying there's no releases from Fukushima whatsoever for the last 13 years, how many people are going to call me a liar? Everybody, every single person on the planet, right? But if I show you this picture from far away and tell you that the nuclear water is in the tanks, well, yeah, look at all the tanks, Dana. What else could be there? Well, first off, it can't be in the tanks if it was gone on day 6, by March the 16th. By day 5, all the reactors' inventories were gone and the fuel pools. And so if I show you this, then the story doesn't work. You like, no, there's nothing in the tanks. Everything is gone, Dana. That's all I'm doing to you. And I was trying to figure out where the hell did number 1 reactor go, because number 1 reactor should be right there. And beyond reactor 4, which is right here, that doesn't exist. They built this contraption there to make you think they're in the fuel pool, and they've done the same thing here for reactor 3. But right behind it, right there, is the common spent fuel pool. And we know that that's at the exact same height as the reactors when the tsunami ran through. So when I went and looked up TEPCO live shot, and you can look up this and get the live shots, there's reactor 1. See reactor 1, they got some kind of contraption built alongside of it. I don't know what it is. We've never seen it. Now they cut off this stack here because this is around 25 sieverts at the base. Just the chimney. Which, by the way, is for venting the fuel pool. There's 25 sieverts at the base of it. And the top part was cracked from the earthquake. It took them almost a year to rig up something to go up there and cut it off because a human can't go anywhere near it, right? But allegedly people are working inside these buildings. So, again, this is ludicrous to even suggest it. It's a despicable industry that you need to start questioning everything they've ever said to you. The water was kept in tanks installed at the site after going through a liquid processing system that removes most of the radionuclides, except for tritium. But they don't show you that picture and make that assertion because the story no longer works, right? So here's the skinny on the tanks, the water filtration system. TEPCO is unable, this is April 21st, 2014, which is 3 years later. 3 years, 1 month, 10 days later. TEPCO is unable to bring contaminated water issues under control to Fukushima Daiichi. The Advanced Liquid Processing System, ALPS, has yet to function reliable. And so in 2014, Prime Minister Abe Shinzo Abe, who's now, thank goodness, was dead, was assassinated. It was one of the best days of humanity's lives. He poisoned everybody on this planet with radiation. That creature did in the food supplies. So they were going to 487 million USD because in 2014 the the ALPS system didn't work. In fact, there was places on the site they still didn't have full control of, and that meant you couldn't go there without dying. Okay, back to the other story. Released via an underwater tunnel 1 kilometer off the power plant. they don't show you this picture, right, and say everything is in the tank, do they? So don't believe anything I'm showing you there. Nothing was detected in the water, no tritium detected in the water, they said. For the fourth batch, the official story is they didn't release anything until August 24th of last year, 2023. The operators plan to skip a procedure to put treated water after it is diluted with seawater inside a large container to confirm the tritium level as a last-minute check before release. Instead, we'll take a sample of the diluted water while it's being discharged with measurements to the tritium concentrations, done once daily. Tritium. So why are you looking for tritium when you lost all your uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium, and 1,000 fission products? Because, like, if they show you that picture and say they're looking for tritium, you're going to say, well, what about the plutonium, uranium? Once you know a little tiny bit about this, the lie doesn't work. During the discharge in the weeks after its completion, the operator will take daily seawater samples from 4 locations, 3 kilometers from the plant, and its finding will be published the following day. A total of 31,000 tons are treated. You can't treat the water because, like, see, they're pouring water over the remains of the reactor cores that might be in the buildings. And then they're allegedly siphoning that water up, is going through pipes over to the filtration system. Now, if it was true, you couldn't step over the pipes or the hoses. They're lethal doses. You couldn't even walk past them, alongside them, because that's a lethal dose. Typical release a video of groundwater entering the crippled Fukushima Daiichi complex, 2013. So at 2200 millisieverts is 2.2 sieverts. And I do believe they're only talking about a beta. So add another 2.2 sieverts of gamma, 2.2 sieverts of neutrons, 2.2 sieverts of betas and alphas, and the X-rays. So a liter of this, if that was in McDonald's, everybody inside, there's 300 people in there, everybody's dead in about 20 minutes. And you can leave that liter there and take out 300 bodies and bring in 300 more, and 20 minutes later they're dead. When you're talking about these high doses of 2.2 sieverts per liter, if you got a few liters of that, just from the energy, right? The gammas will pulse up to 600 feet, according to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission we covered yesterday extensively. Indonesia activists are suing Japan over treated water. And see the media, the Japanese media calling it treated water? And so they're happy to publicize that because they bought into the lie. They bought into the propaganda. See, they're not going to look at that and call it treated water, right? Because then it doesn't work. I'm not going to call it crippled, because when you look at the picture, it's not crippled, it's completely gone. But because nobody challenges them, and like just me challenging them, they've hired expert nuclear scientists to go to Japan and come up with a strategy to take me out. Because I got 36 people on my show, that makes me a threat to the nuclear industry. They've called into the show, right? You can buy these t-shirts at my website, the Calm Down Charlie t-shirts. So, if this was your loved ones, if this was your husband or wife or brother or sister or aunt or uncle, cousin or whatever the case may be, and you seen them here, and that's the building that they allegedly were in, that they said they were at the top of the building, 100 plus feet above the stump, the nuclear meltdown stump that's left. Would you spit in your loved one's face the next time you saw them? Probably. Would you be ashamed of them? Guaranteed. If you're half human, you'll be ashamed of them. You'd be humiliated that your loved one had done something like that. You remember the local environmental organization said the release of the treated, again they used the word treated, nuclear waste and calling it wastewater, will directly impact Indonesia ecosystem, asserting that the seafood products contaminated by the water pose a hazard to humans that consume them. And they show you these long-range pictures. They don't show you anything up close anymore. All they'll show you is these types of pictures, right? You're never going to see that picture in the media and tell you that it's leaking. South Korea is going to send 21-member team. This is a terrible story. Like the headline says, oh my goodness, really? They're finally going to go there and investigate it, are they? As soon as you read the story, you're like, just scum of the earth. Degenerate South Korea to send 21-member scumbag team to Japan, and they're not going to review the discharge plans at the Fukushima nuclear plant. They're not going to question. They're not going to take this picture. Like, everybody should take a screen capture and email that and Twitter it to those people. When you find out what their names is, Twitter it to them and try to humiliate them. Look at these degenerates. This is what a degenerates. Their job is to stab you in the back. So this administration is pretending nothing happened, but the current, previous administrations in South Korea closed 130 schools in South Korea. South Korea will send a 21-member team of government experts, in other words, useless scum, to Japan next week to visit the Fukushima nuclear power plant, where they will review contentious Japanese plans to release the treated water into the Pacific. The 6-day visit starting Sunday will focus on examining the plant's processing system, which reduces radioactive material from contaminated water, and whether the treated water would be safe enough to be diluted and discharged into the ocean. Now, see, so that sounds pretty cool, but that's simply not what they're. As you read through this, you realize that's not what's going to happen. After a summit with South Korean president, a former prosecutor who said Fukushima didn't melt down before he was elected, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida announced that his government agreed to host. The government agreed to host a team of South Korean government experts at Fukushima to calm South Korea's concerns. So, like, you're already predisposed, or you're releasing the findings before you even get there, by claiming that the only reason you're doing there is to calm them down. Instead of having 21 experts doing their own investigation, this is just simply gaslighting. Concerns about food safety and a show of his desire for improved ties. So Seoul had hot spots at 1,000% normal background radiation, 1,200 kilometers from Fukushima. So how can you suggest there was no adverse side effects? To calm South Korea's concerns. Because over 86% of the population was protesting tritium, because the brainwashing is very powerful in South Korea, apparently. Japanese officials says the South Korea visit to the plant will not amount to a genuine inspection, as the safety of the water discharge plant is already under review by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which may publicize the result next month. Well, the International Atomic Energy Agency, let's go back to 2023. Japan can finally release Fukushima waters into the ocean 2 years when a UN review concludes. 2 years after the UN started investigating it. But that's simply not what happened. Here's what Rafael Grossi, the General Director of the International Atomic Energy Agency / United Nations, says, we have to recognize that such a thing has not happened before and that Japan would have the final say on the release. So if Japan got the final say, what are they doing there? And they're not even a regulatory agency, as demonstrated here. In 2023, last year, the International Atomic Energy Agency said public trust is key to projects using radioactive soil from Fukushima. Like, why would you reuse radioactive soil? What do you mean public trust? So what they said was that the International Atomic, this is Rafael Grossi, by the way, has made the statement, Clark repeated it, the International Atomic Energy Agency is not a regulator and not in a position to judge or approve Japan's soil recycling project. So when Japan says that the International Atomic Energy Agency is going to do the review and they don't need to do one, The dishonesty is very big. As the safety of the water discharge plan is already under review by the International Atomic Energy Agency, who passed it immediately off to the Japanese government. There is no safety review by the. Why the hell are you listening to the International Atomic Energy Agency for? They're part of a company like. McDonald's or Walmart. They don't have any authority over any country. If you go to their website, frequently asked questions about the Fukushima Daiichi's ALPS-treated, alleged treated. Using the word treated is absurd, by the way. The government of Japan remains fully responsible for the safety of handling the ALPS-treated water. In other words, what was the point of having the page there? They told, that's 3 times they told you they have no authority whatsoever. They can't disprove or approve of it. So back to the South Korea story, the 21 members will be led by Yu Guk, chairperson of the Nuclear Safety and Security Commission, literally one of the worst humans you'll ever come across. That's the only way you're getting that job. Who said his focus will be on the plant's advanced liquid processing systems, or ALPS, which I showed you the evidence of before, didn't work. If it didn't work then, it ain't going to work now. Describing the visit to government matter. In other words, it's unlike the alleged headline, where they're going to send down a 21-member team to investigate. There's nothing going on whatsoever. Again, it's just gaslighting. Japan's foreign ministry also confirmed the South Korean delegation's visit to the plants in a statement that also endorsed the effectiveness of the ALPS system, saying it ensures that all radioactive material other than tritium, so they're saying, confirms South Korea's delegation visit to Japan plant is a statement that endorses the effectiveness of the ALPS system. It's just by them going there, that endorses it. How does that actually work? Saying endorses that all the radioactive material other than tritium are reduced to safe levels just by going to the site itself. And then suggesting only 3 reactors melt, and because they exclude Reactor 4. Does Reactor 4 look like it melted to anybody? When you're changing the fuel, 2/3 of it is left in the reactor core. The building is completely gone. These are previously were 119-story, 190-foot, 65-meter buildings. And released large amounts of radiation. How can you release? And it did. Look, massive amounts of radiation in 19 days right there. So officials said the tanks must be removed to make room to build facilities for the plant's decommissioning. But they don't tell us what those facilities are, by the way. And minimize the risk of a leak in case of another major earthquake or something, or tsunami. Well, first off, why not dig a deep geological repository and put all your wastewater down in that? Why pour it into the ocean, which you don't own? Because you never stop pouring into the ocean. You can't contain anything because everything is already gone after 6 days. It was all gone. And we can't sleepwalk into this nightmare anymore. You got to have a conversation. All I'm trying to do is bring you a big foundation, and so we're all on the right page when we have a conversation. And nuclear has to be held accountable. There has to be criminal prosecutions. We got to bring back burning them at the stakes, right? It should be illegal. We should be legal to burn these people at the stakes when they're found guilty in the court of law. As soon as they're found guilty, no appeals, bring them out, surround them with wooden stakes, and burn them alive. That's how egregious these people, the damage they got done to humanity and the 8 million species. I know that might sound extraordinary, but it's not. When you look at what they got done to you. With radioactive fallout flowing from 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, is nuclear a lethal threat to Earth? And there's only one answer to that, is yes. Nuclear is an extinction level event. It is an extinction event. The model to your left is the NOAA's, the American model. and it's only based on cesium-137, iodine-131, as if all the other isotopes don't exist, as if all the other iodines, the strontium, neptunium, plutonium, the curium, the uranium, and everything else don't exist. Public concern over Japan's fish imports looks to be justified for South Korea. Contaminated seafood recently on sale in South Korea is adding to the fear. Over 6 million pounds found since 3/11. So how much was consumed and poisoned the population that they didn't find? And the numbers are shocking, how much they import every year. And look who the friggin' writer is, Mari Yamaguchi. So you know it's a cover story when you see Mari Yamaguchi attached to it. So if you show this picture here, where they're pretending they're in the fuel pool of Reactor 4, and that doesn't upset you, because that's, by the way, that's only a fraction of the media that done it. And if that doesn't upset you, what does? Really, what does? Why aren't you upset when you see that? Why aren't you indignant when you see something like that? Because that would be the appropriate response. And the fact that they done that, pretending they're in a building that don't exist, so it wasn't just the people, it was that media, CBS, and BBC, and ABC Australia, and CNN. The whole media had to participate in the lie for it to work. Because that was shown on special programs, that was on their TV news cycle for weeks and weeks and weeks. So why do they hate you? That's the appropriate answer. Upcoming Nuclear Energy Summit in Brussels. This is the first one in history. World leaders, the internet, will gather in Brussels at the first ever Nuclear Energy Summit to highlight the role of nuclear energy in addressing the global challenges to reduce the use of fossil fuels, enhance energy security, and boost economic development. The first ever energy summit, which is the United Nations. So when you got the West Coast was hit with 220 million atoms per liter, and the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is where that story came from, that was their site, the International Atomic Energy Agency, say nothing got out. Like, how can the world have a future without addressing this? Because I can guarantee you haven't got a future if you don't address this. I'm not doing this because you're getting all kinds of awards and medals and everybody wants to get you on their radio and TV show. No, we're doing it because it's a story nobody wants to have and that the whole world better have. Because the sooner the world wakes up and has a conversation, the sooner we can start thinking about having some kind of a future. Because we can't have a future without addressing this. There is no future without coming. And what I mean by that is, if you address this properly, the world has a conversation, then we come up with solutions. We won't come up with solutions because they got to admit then they got a problem. They won't admit they got a problem. But once the world figures it out, what's happening, if that's to happen, then the world will come up with solutions. One of them will be to burn everybody in the nuclear industry at the stake. That's just figuratively speaking, right? I mean, I wouldn't argue if they'd done it. And if they needed somebody to set the fires, I wouldn't like the job, but I'll take it. In my letter, I challenged the Nuclear Waste Management Organization to provide evidence. So the Nuclear Waste Management Organization got $28 billion 18 years ago or something, like the rest of the countries, to find to start up a nuclear waste repository. And they've done nothing. They don't want a repository because you can't store it because of splitting atoms, right? And so they're happy to let that hemorrhage into your environment. And the land that they did buy in Northern Ontario, Canada, was 1,600 acres of prime farmland, surrounded by prime farmland. You want to keep farming that actively, constantly, because and everything is repackaged. And the repackaging they expect will go on for 100 years. This industry cannot coexist with species. And so, this is not a game. You need to get educated, and you need to challenge this industry at every time they open their mouth, you need to get out there and challenge them. So the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which never managed a single thing in 18 years, it's got $28 billion. And so the interest on that each year, they just throw money around, cause fights, and they act like big shots with no intentions of ever coming up with a solution. They're not trying. So the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, Bruce Power and them, which is the nuclear industry itself in that organization, are claiming that the Northern Ontario, which doesn't use nuclear power at all, uses nuclear power all the time. Someone challenged them. And now they caused a big kerfuffle, but nevertheless, they're not using nuclear power in Northern Ontario, Canada. Where there's 7,000 lakes there, why are you trying to put a nuclear waste in the middle of 7,000 lakes for? 5.5 million fuel assemblies from the CANDU reactors. So that all of it's splitting atoms into the environment. There is no containment. Iran has further increased its total stockpile of uranium, says UN nuclear watchdog. UN is not, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency. But again, as I showed you earlier, they're not a watchdog. They're not a regulatory agency. They don't have any authority. They're the bully. That's all they are, right? They're not legitimate in any sense of the word whatsoever. There's no referendums. Nobody's... You're talking about a military-industrial complex. Iran is increasing its stockpile because it's got 49 American military bases on its border. It's got no choice, see? The possibilities of recycling nuclear fissile waste. Another liar, another scumbag. And you can look at him, you can imagine him mowing a kid over and getting out, stealing their lunch money and their sucker and driving away. One of the primary challenges associated with nuclear power is managing nuclear waste. Well, as I articulated over and over and over, the problem with nuclear waste is splitting atoms into the environment. So he's talking about mixed oxide fuel. The story is anyway. Which is illegal in America and illegal in Canada. Yeah, it's done at some of the national laboratories, but it's still illegal to do as a power plant. By recycling nuclear waste, not only do we reduce the volume of waste requiring disposal, no, you liberate it back into the environment, all the nuclear waste. You don't reduce the waste. What the hell are you talking about? The amount of waste you create is way more than... And not only that, this fuel you're talking about, this high assay, weapons-grade plutonium mixed oxide fuel that you're talking about, when you take that out of the reactor in the future and you put it in a fuel pool, the toxicity of it is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison, the emissions. And it's very energetic. It's producing atoms at a flow we've never even heard tell of pre-mixed oxide fuel. The approach aligns with sustainable principles, making nuclear energy one of the most, if not the most, environmentally friendly power sources. Well, picking up 30 million one-ton bags from a single nuclear accident on 3% of land has got nothing to do with environmentally friendly. And banning the food in half of a country because of a nuclear meltdown has nothing to do with environmentally friendly. Brian. The Center for Creative Ecologies presents Nuclear Now's Contemporary Art, Radiation, Militarized Ecologies. Well, the military is one of the biggest polluters on the bloody planet, the most resource-intensive industry on the entire planet. So imagine if the Center for Creative Ecologies present Nuclear Nows uses this picture, for instance, in their exhibitions. And so why it's so deadly that they got to pretend they're in a building that don't exist so they can get away with poisoning the 8 million species. With radioactive fire flowing from 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, is nuclear a lethal threat to Earth? Such an important... excuse me. I'm smurfed up today. The panels invite overlapping and varied ways of thinking about the enduring present of atomic violence from the perspective of the arts. Well, what's wrong with that art right there? What's wrong with this art right here? Fukushima Unit 1 and 2 exhaust stacks had measurements of over 10 sieverts per hour. But we know now, because we got the documents, it was 25 sieverts per hour. Atomic toxicity. Yeah. 30 million one-ton bags of radiation, and the food banned by 55 countries and 14 prefectures. That's pretty toxic. This is such a crazy story, man. UK lawmakers, you're going to crack up when you hear this story. UK lawmakers seek reassurances about nuclear deterrent after reports of a failed missile test. So this nuclear sub has been in the refit for 7 years. They could have built 2 subs in that period of time. British lawmakers are seeking reassurance about the nation's nuclear deterrent after reports that a test of the system failed dramatically last month when an unarmed missile crashed into the sea near the submarine from which it was launched. Crashed into the sea from the submarine where it was launched. It gets worse. Defense Secretary Grant Shapes was on board the HMS Vanguard to witness the test firing of a Trident missile designed to carry nuclear warheads. Shapes and this is Defense Secretary Grant Shapes and the First Sea Lord Admiral Ben Key, the Royal Navy Chief of Staff, were taking part in what was the final exercise for the Vanguard after a refit that took more than 7 years. 7 years! 7 years for a refit. And you got no hospitals, you got all the veterans living on the streets, starving to death all day long. You got tons of money for this stupid machine, haven't you? And you can't use the weapons, because that's the end of it. You can't cash the checks anymore. After a refit that took more than 7 years. So the test reaffirms the effectiveness of the UK's nuclear deterrent, said the Minister of Defence. Despite the fact that it didn't even work, it confirms the Defence Secretary will want to reassure the Department this test has no impact on the effectiveness of the UK's deterrent operation. Well, of course it did. Like, my goodness, right? A refit that took 7 years, the missile came down, flopped, came back down and almost hit the nuclear sub. That's not a flop at all. And reaffirms the effectiveness of the UK nuclear deterrent. How does that test reaffirm the effectiveness of a UK nuclear deterrent? Again, anybody want to explain that? Double talk to me. Signature House nuclear package should get a floor vote. The Atomic Energy Advancement Act, the HR 6544. The bill is meant to reduce regulatory hurdles, really, and bolster the development of small modular reactors. They call them factory-built reactors. Well, they don't even exist. They're decades away from fruition. That have been touted as a lifeline for aging disease factories known as nuclear power plants, and a crucial step towards cutting the nation's planet-warming emissions. Workers at reactor number 3 say nuclear fuel is gone from the spent fuel pool, and there's great skepticism that any pellets remain. And this was the detonation of it. So this is a plume from Fukushima. This is what's heating your planet, is 80 years of these emissions, pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. And this nuclear industry is holding the entire planet hostage, and everybody is got the Stockholm Syndrome, where they're in complete denial. And this is not tenable. This story is crazy. This is a crazy story. Nuclear energy experts train researchers meet the future non-proliferation challenges. Only problem with the story is we're talking about Idaho National Laboratory, which is all about nuclear proliferation. Here's the students. Now smile. We need you for useful idiots for our cameras. As nuclear energy is increasingly recognized as a vital component of the clean energy transition, but it's not recognized. Last year, in 2023, there was 507 gigawatts of renewables came online. It's equal to over 600 large nuclear reactors in 12 months. Nuclear lost the capacity of 2 nuclear reactors last year. They went backwards 2 reactors. Renewables went forward the animosity equivalent of 600 nuclear large reactors in renewable energy. There is no nuclear renaissance, period. There's nothing even close to it. The national nuclear energy industry is facing a decline in skilled workers. To build and operate these technologies without action, the U.S. stands to lose its edge in nuclear energy innovation to foreign governments. Well, you haven't built anything in 40 years. You lost that battle 40 years ago. Idaho National Laboratory is no exception. 8 internationally recognized nuclear non-proliferation fuel cycle experts / scumbags have recently retired, thank goodness. They should be tried for crimes against humanity immediately. And Savannah River National Laboratory, one of the biggest disease factories in the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and the Idaho National Laboratory. Okay, so Department of Energy Idaho Buried Waste Project marks a major accomplishment ahead of schedule, December 29, 2021. Aquifer Protection Central to Idaho Site Cleanup, September 12, 2019, Idaho National Laboratories. When it comes to clean up the Idaho National Laboratory site, it's all about the aquifer. Think of that statement now. It's all about the aquifer, which is the same size as Lake Erie, but except it's underground. The Snake River Plain Aquifer, that is the primary drinking agricultural water source for more than 300,000 residents, and who knows how many millions of people where they ship the food to. Over 30-year cleanup, 30 years of cleaning up, 30 years. The aquifer protection has always been one of our primary drivers. Well, this is the aquifer. It's the size of Lake Erie. You're talking about a massive, I got the numbers coming up. In addition to changing past practices such as discontinuing use of disposal ponds. These are ponds with no barriers. Hang on a second here. I might have to go back to the water here. Wait, bear with me. Gonna lose my voice here tonight? What the hell? In addition to changing past practices like discontinuing the use of disposal ponds, they just dump their nuclear waste in the ponds, and let it evaporate into the environment. And injection wells, where they dump their nuclear waste down in the wells. All of this is right above the biggest aquifer in that part of the country. The Idaho National Laboratory site, which is nothing but a great big stupid genocidal disease factory, is the #1 shipper of transuranic waste to the waste isolation pilot plant, and which is waste like, contaminated gloves, contaminated tools, contaminated overalls, and stuff like that. But no, that's not actually true what's going on. The ICP removed over 9,100 cubic meters of nearly 46,000 drums of radioactive and hazardous waste from an unlined Cold War landfill. So let's say they dumped 250,000 45-gallon drums there. They got back 46,000. That sits above the aquifer. Unbelievable, man. And so you can see the Idaho National Laboratories up there. The whole thing is situated over the biggest aquifer in that part of the country, and the size of one of the Great Lakes, Lake Erie. They also have high-pressure pumps being used to remove solvent vapors. The solvents is the radiation from beneath the landfill. To date, nearly 256,000 pounds of vapors have been removed and destroyed by treatment units. That's a very dubious statement, isn't it? And they've taken several other significant steps to clean up past contaminations of the aquifer and to remove future threats that include an aquifer treatment unit north end of the Idaho National Laboratory site that has treated nearly 700 million gallons of water, radioactive water, through a pump and treat system. Again, it doesn't work that way. A pump and dump is more like it. And the use of bioremediation, in which a food-grade WEE is injected into the aquifers in the vicinity of a contaminant plume to encourage microorganisms to feed on the nuclear waste. Again, this is a complete conjecture that this can work. More than 58,000 cubic meters of stored transuranic and mixed low-level waste shipped out of state for disposal to the Waste Isolation Pilot Project, I would imagine. And 11 of the 15 underground high-level waste tanks have been emptied and cleaned. Well, you can't clean these nuclear tanks. It doesn't work that way. You can't do that. And you know that because they grouted them into place. You can't clean these tanks. You simply can't do it. It's nuclear. You can't clean nuclear. Removal of more than 200 contaminated surplus buildings. Well, what are they contaminated from? What were they? What do you mean surplus? You weren't surplus buildings. You didn't build them, just leave them sitting there that nobody bothered using. These are contaminated. So they were used for storage and for all kinds of other nefarious purposes that the nuclear industry is notorious for, including nuclear reactors. They actually built over 50 nuclear reactors above the biggest aquifer in that part of the country, folks. A reprocessing facility, a mixed oxide fuel site. And the world's largest hot cells, which is what they use to the preamble to the mixed oxide fuel production, plutonium mixed oxide fuel. More significant work remains, including near-term milestones such as meeting the commitment to remove targeted buried waste, safely converting 900,000 gallons of liquid nuclear waste stored on site to granular solid. A lot of this stuff is still splitting atoms, and placing the remaining spent fuel in dry storage, the whole story just terrified me. It just changed the whole dynamics. Longer-term challenges included treating the stored high-level waste and preparing spent nuclear fuel for eventual off-site disposal. You're trusting maniacs. You're going to put your faith in maniacs with no oversight. And the work is already accomplished at the Idaho National Laboratory site, has significantly improved the safety of the Snake River Plain aquifer. 30 years of dumping it. You can never recover the aquifer. Officials finished a buried and nuclear waste cleanup at the Idaho site April 1st, 2022. Work to dig up and remove radioactive hazardous waste buried for decades in unlined pits, which means it's in the aquifer, at a nuclear facility that sits atop a giant aquifer in eastern Idaho. And the waste was from rocky flats, buried in unlined pits and trenches about 50 miles west of Idaho Falls, right over the aquifer. The landfill sits above the Lake Erie-sized eastern Snake River Plain aquifer that supplies farms and cities in the region. So all of these people, you're going to see an explosion of heart, liver, lung, respiratory. And Canada's on one side, America's on the other side. Lake Erie is a massive lake. What's the numbers on this? It's 241 miles long, and it's 57 miles wide. So that's big enough to have major significant storms on. But that's above ground, right? So that's what the aquifer is at Idaho National Laboratory. And the report said contaminated levels at all but a handful of nearly 180 wells are below acceptable standards for drinking water set by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Yeah, but the United States Environmental Protection Agency is a notorious pump for the nuclear industry. Like if you go to my video last night, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's releases from the Freedom of Information Act's files that we were shifted through last week and this week, you quickly come to the conclusion that these people are insane. These are insane criminals. And what they got done to us is they destroyed the future of humanity and the 8 million species. There's never been a repercussion for being evil in the nuclear industry. And there's tons of repercussions for me trying to have a conversation, though. Looks like they're going to destroy me, but I got myself set up so that it's going to be pretty hard to get rid of me. And that's the whole idea of what I've been doing for the last couple of years, was making sure that I can keep doing this for as long as I'm healthy enough to do it. The cleanup demonstrates their ability to protect the underlying Snake River Plain aquifer and allow for future research and development emissions. Allow for future research and development emissions at the Idaho National Laboratory site. So what they're trying to do is claim to clean up everything, therefore they're entitled to pollute everything again. The nuclear site started operating in the late 1940s under the Atomic Energy Commission, a forerunner to the Energy Department, and contamination of the aquifers began in 1952. If the site started in 1940, then the pollution started in 1940. Because back in those days, they had absolutely zero regard. And so an example of that was Hanford in the 40s and 50s dumped 450 billion gallons directly into the soil and on-line trenches uphill from the Columbian River. And that 450 billion gallons, it's hard to comprehend it. It's a 6-foot wide aquarium of nuclear waste, lethal by the liter, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet more than once. And so this is outrageous that they were able to get away with that, let alone they've done the same thing everywhere. And there's places on the Columbia River where they measured 70 sieverts per hour. In other words, if you're drifting by it fishing in your boat, just drifting along in the river, you'll die that day or that week from that dose. If you go past that spot. So even let's just say the contamination started in 1952. That's 70 years of nuclear contamination. You can't clean up, like if you got 1 year of nuclear contamination reaching the aquifer, you can never clean that up. And that everybody dependent on that aquifer, which is thousands of farms downstream, it's terrifying. It's just a despicable industry and despicable people every single time. It seems like the worst of the worst. That's who gets the job. If you're a degenerate scum, you got a job at the nuclear industry waiting for you. Contamination reached the aquifer through injection wells, on-lined ponds, pits into which radioactive material from other states was dumped over the aquifer in on-lined pits. Accidental spills, accidental on purpose like they've done in the Manhattan Project, mainly during the Cold War era, before regulation to protect the environment was put in place. And in those times, they were guessing, so they were creating copious amounts of nuclear waste and just dumping it in the rivers and streams and estuaries and on-lined pits, where it immediately, as soon as it rained, found its way into the aquifers. The cleanup project at the landfill site never started in 2005. So it was over 50 years of unmitigated emissions into the aquifers. So that's a dead duck. Is the equivalent of nearly 50,000 storage drums, each containing 55 gallons, is what they recovered from a single spot. But that's 10 million liters, 10.4 million liters. So how much got away? And how radioactive was this stuff? Well, obviously this was the sludge that is lethal by the liter to anybody walking past it. And most of the waste is being sent to the U.S. government's waste isolation pilot plant. In other words, they're storing high-level waste at the waste isolation pilot project when it's only supposed to be contaminated gloves and contaminated equipment, folks. Idaho site marks 30 years of cleanup success. Well, why would you put the word success there? You can't quantify that assertion. And look how big this thing is, the size of Lake Erie. And look where Idaho National Laboratories is located. Right over the aquifer itself, the entire site. And that's a big site. So there's approximately 5,700 people working at this massive disease factory. And there's 2,300 square kilometers. And the laboratory employs approximately 5,700 people. And throughout its lifetime, there have been more than 50 one-of-a-kind nuclear reactors built by various scumbags at the facility for testing. And all but 3 of them are out of service. So they have 3 reactors currently there running. And 47 reactors that we don't know nothing about. Right over an aquifer. How many of them melted down or went straight into the aquifer, I wonder? Because you know they did. What a stupid industry. What a stupid industry. It's literally just a stupid industry. And stupid people. Unbelievably stupid to stay working in that industry. Barrels of radioactive sludge ruptured while being prepared for transport to WIP. I thought WIP was only using storing radioactive gloves and radioactive shovels and radioactive hammers and contaminated overalls. Radioactive sludge, I've never heard of radioactive sludge being transported to the waste isolation pilot project. You can't down blend that, see? So I've never heard tell of it. For permanent storage. And that the 55-gallon barrel that ruptured is part of the badly documented radioactive waste, badly documented. They don't know what's in the 55-gallon drums. From Rocky Flats plant near Denver. That's where Joe's to, right? And Joe's suffering gigantism from the plutonium poisoning as a kid. Nuclear Energy University's program at the Idaho National Laboratory. So you bring the scumbag nuclear students over to the disease factory, and the lab hires more than 300 interns each summer to work alongside the laboratory employees. So these interns, right, these are disposable people. Hey, go over and grab that jug and put it in that lead case for me. Yeah, okay, boss. I'll buy you a coffee tonight. Thanks, boss. And so this is what they're up to with the interns. They're not interns. They're not Sally Ann's. They're the victims of the nuclear industry, right? It never stops, eh? Buried nuclear waste from the Cold War could resurface. They're talking about the Bikini Atolls, the Marshall Islands. They vaporized the islands. So the Castle Bravo, which I talked about earlier, was equal to 1,000 Nagasaki or plutonium bombs going off at one time. And the Marshall Islands, as I showed you earlier, over 1 million square kilometers are still too radioactive to be habitable. A Texas Basin County renews opposition to disposal of high-level nuclear waste. This Holtec. Chris Singh, what an evil, disgusting parasite Chris Singh turned out to be, didn't he? Which is Holtec. He's the president, the vice president, the janitor, he's everything. The resolution renews opposition permitting the disposal of high-level waste. Waste control specialists promised the people of Andrews they would not exceed Class C radioactive waste. And when we knew that, we talked about that when he'd done this, right? When the people, it was like 5 or 6 years ago, When the people became aware of the WCS petition for a change in the regulation governing the waste disposal, that the federal government was only considering one site, the WCS site, for shallow disposal of greater than Class C waste, the citizens band together and looked to their elected officials for a resolution. Good luck. Last year, the Department of Energy granted a license to another private operator. This should never exist in the nuclear industry. There should be no profit in the nuclear industry, because the incentive to make profit will override the incentive for safety, right? Holtec International, they take, say, there's $2 billion there to decommission the site. The money they're going to make is money left over from decommissioning the site, so there's no incentive to be. And it's easy to take a few $1 million, give it to a lobbyist to pay off a senator to change the definition of nuclear waste so they can put a lot more in local landfills, right? And that's exactly what Chris Singh has been up to. Allows the company to store high-level nuclear waste, largely from power plants, for 40 years at the WIP site. And the WIP was supposed to be just simply for radioactive gloves and tools and overalls and stuff like that. Now they got 45-gallon drums, thousands of them of sludge, radioactive sludge, from rocky flats that nobody even knows what's in the drums. This would be every step of nuclear is a betrayal. Iran calls for a nuclear disarmament of Israel. Now remember, Israel on the 2nd of November last year had already dropped the equivalent of 2 Hiroshima nuclear bombs on Gaza. And it was 70 tons per square kilometer. I think it works out to 64 pounds per person. And that was way back then. So imagine what they got done since that. I like this one. Andrew Forrest labels coalition push for nuclear energy bull dust and a new law. This is the Australian, which is always a circus. Mining billionaire says the cost of nuclear will be 4 to 5 times that of renewables, and opposition policy is an excuse for doing nothing. The pro-nuclear, see what happened was Australia about 10 years ago got invaded by the American military-industrial complex. And so currently they have 7 of the 10 biggest weapons producers on the planet had set up offices in Australia, and they operate on big profit only. And so they create all kinds of conflicts. They talked the Australian government through lobbyists into buying nuclear submarines that they can't possibly use. Who the frig is going to go to war against Australia? Nobody. Would delay the clean energy transition harm regional Australians? The executive chair and founder of the mining company Fortescue and the renewable energy investor Tartarang on Monday urged the opposition to stop advocating expensive and unfeasible alternatives to renewables like nuclear. And expanding rooftop solar could be rolled out instead of large-scale renewables. And Australia's solar roof industry is incredible. I know Stephen Young done that a few years ago too, and I think it turned out really good for him. Forrest said it was hopeless that the politicians were asking Australians to wait for new technologies in 20 years or whatever, because you're talking about small modular reactors. So why does the Australian government want memorandums of understanding for a technology that doesn't exist? You got 100 companies out there that still can't crack it. Even if they do, it's going to take 20 to 30 years before you can get through the regulatory processes. Forrest said it was hopeless that the politicians are asking Australians to wait for new technology in 20 years that may never happen. And replacing Australia coal power plants with nuclear would cost $387 billion. Well, first off, Australia they can't build that much nuclear anywhere on the planet, let alone Australia. They don't have the supply network, they don't have the manpower, they don't have the workforce, they don't have the initiative on top of that, right? And Australia is perfect for geothermal, for goodness sakes. Forrest said he'd done the numbers and nuclear would cost 4 to 5 times more than renewables, which can reduce emissions within a few years. So let's look at geothermal for a few minutes. A company aims to power the world for millions of years by digging the deepest holes ever. Geothermal. A company named Quasi Energy could work on nearly every coal, gas, oil, nuclear power plant on the planet. So you leave the plant intact, you create your geothermal, switch off your gas, oil, coal, or nuclear, leave everything else, all the infrastructure there, and turn on geothermal. And aims to use X-rays to melt rocks and repurpose coal, gas, oil, nuclear power plants into deep geothermal wells, effectively transforming dirty fossil fuel plants, nuclear and that, into clean ones. So there's a technology showing up this year for deep drilling, and it goes like this. Geothermal energy could be cheaper to access thanks to a new drilling technology. We'll use 25,000 pounds per square inch water jets that are powerful enough while at the bottom hole conditions to cut the rocks into particulate profile shapes that precondition the rock to be more readily broken by inbuilt pneumatic fluid-powered percussive hammers. So you use 25,000 psi water jets to split the rocks, and you're going to use pneumatic hammers to beat up those shards that are left over, and then the drill bit comes down through it. So currently the drills penetrate hard rock at a rate of 1 to 2 meters per hour. But using this new technique, you can do 10 meters per hour and reach geothermal reservoirs 4 times quicker on average than is possible today. And so now if you take this particular technology and quasi-electric, right, that's just 2 of the many, many other ones. So why wouldn't you use geothermal? It's perfect. It's everywhere. And if your universities, if you can drag your universities, the School of Mass Destructions, away from the nuclear industry long enough, you can solve any of the issues with geothermal in 6 or 7 days. Whereas like fusion, it was always 50 years away. Why are you wasting time on fusion when geothermal is everywhere? Because the industry hates your guts. It's the same reason why every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. Because they hate your guts. Type 1 Energy to construct a prototype nuclear fusion reactor in Tennessee. Well, this reminds me of another story about fusion. I think you might like. Remember this story? December the 20th, 2023. This is the Idaho National Laboratory too, I do believe in it. Well, 200 lasers in a peppercorn-sized fuel capsule. Scientists inched closer to mastering the fusion energy. You're going to like this story. The energy produced in December 2022, which got all kinds of people that never invested in nuclear to invest in fusion. They all lost their money by now. It took around 2 megajoules to power the reaction, which released a total of 315 megajoules. Enough extra energy to boil 10 kettles of water. So say 300 million degree Fahrenheit temperatures. How much water can you boil? And then how do you extrapolate that you had enough energy left over to boil another 10 kettles of water? Have you got any idea how insane that assertion actually is? Like, first off, they don't tell you how many kettles of water they can boil at 300 million degree Fahrenheit temperatures, right? And to suggest that the excess energy was enough to boil 10 kettles of water, which is what, 15 cents worth of electricity or something, is obviously it's a lie, right? But all the media came out and promoted this story, and people start investing on December 22nd like crazy in fusion energy companies. There's 20 new ones out there, and they have no right to exist, right? They shouldn't be taking investors' money. They don't have a product. And people were manipulated into investing in it just before Christmas. And every one of them lost their shirts. Every single one of them that invested will lose their shirt. What a despicable thing to do. That's nuclear industry. That's normal. That's what nuclear industry, that's the only thing they actually do good, is they steal from everybody. Enough to boil around 10 kettles of water, extra energy. It's an insane story, see? It's an insane story. Let me see here. Well, we still had to pick up some more equipment. I'm finished picking up equipment for the trailer. We picked up the last of it today. I'm going to show you a little video of that. And Sue, Sue, in the comment section, of course, donated another 100. I took that, and I went in and a little bit extra, and we picked up a bunch of the last parts that I needed for. So everything you're going to see is for the E-tracks that I picked up. And so you see these little belts there, they hook up to the E-tracks, right? And so this is pretty self-explanatory. I'm just going to play this little clip. We'll come over and close the poll. Always takes a minute for this to fire up, so bear with me. Well, it's Monday, the 27th. We've got 100 feet of hose. And we got all kinds of chummies for the snowing today. They fit on those tracks, right? All of those pieces. We also got sort of grommets because we're take advantage of it, get it where we can, right? So now we got all the pieces we needed, and I just didn't want to take a chance, right? So we got everything we were hoping to get. And so that whole system there now is complete. I just got to finish the other little odds and ends there, but we don't have to spend any more money on it. So incredibly grateful, and it's too late. We got everything. We bought everything. And so we picked up 12 of those today because they were on sale. And then I picked up 100 foot of air hose because I'm using the air tools all the time. And I'm tortured. My hose is 50 feet long, and it's not enough, right? So now I got 150 feet of hose. I can reach anywhere on the property, basically. Because when I was trying to do the air hose on that yesterday, and look, notice how most of the snow was gone because we had massive rain the day before. We had a snowstorm just a number of days before that. It was crazy amount of snow. And then I even showed you a video last night where I was out yesterday morning, or the morning before, that video was, dragging snow with the box scraper, right? Behind the ATV, behind the quad. And then the next day, most of the snow was gone because it rained all night, like brutal rain all night. And now it's snowing out there again, as you've seen in that. When you look at that video, let me bring that back up for you. Or this video, is it? I think I flashed up the camera up there. Look at all the snow today, right? Yesterday, that was bone dry. Today, here it goes again. And we weren't supposed to get any snow today. And so I'm super happy now because we got the stuff on sale. Otherwise, would have never got any of it. And got really good price, super amazing price on it. I guess they're going to restock or something. And so I got all the pieces. It's just hard to believe, eh? That's great news. So we're going to bring up the poll here. I'm going to close that down tonight. With radioactive fallout, and I showed this at the first 37 minutes we covered this poll. And it's an incredible story. With radioactive fallout flowing from 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, is nuclear a lethal threat to Earth? And the answer is yes, nuclear is a lethal threat to Earth. We're going to close that poll down. And so we drained the bank, but we got all the pieces. This has been several weeks of hardcore. And a lot of these are just a single time buying. But for stuff like that, you got all these extra little pieces. And if you don't get it, the sale was over on Thursday. So I said, if I don't go after it right now. Who knows what might happen between them? Somebody else might buy it all up. I went and bought every one of them they had on sale, which was 12 more. And we picked up 10 on the weekend. So there's 22 of those chummies that can fit into the E-tracks, so you can lock everything down. So we got more than enough to carry us through for years and years and years. I'm pretty happy because that trailer's in great shape, right? And if I didn't go buy it now, then I might never get that chance. Alrighty, so that's the show tonight. I'd like to thank everybody that contributed over the last couple of weeks and made that possible. We still got lots of other projects, but I'm not worried about it right now. I even spent most of my pension, right, to get the extra stuff. And because if you don't do it at the one time, a lot of the times it won't happen, right? So it's done. Hopefully we don't have any other... Well, it's not. We've been trying to do it for a couple of years and we finally got it done. That's the end of it. So thank you, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great day. We'll see everybody on tomorrow night's show, the 27th, which is Tuesday, the next day after that. So tomorrow night we're probably going to cover a Freedom of Information show from the 4.4 million emails the Nuclear Regulatory Commission released. And Wednesday's show is going to be the Fukushima tanks. And so we're going to come out and have that conversation all day. Have a great night, everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. And we're going to, hopefully, unless there's breaking news, we're going to cover the Freedom of Information releases tomorrow night. And then Wednesday, we're going to cover the dumping, right? Because you know there's going to be a lot of stories coming out about that. I'm going to be all over that. See everybody on the next show. Take care, folks. Have a great night.